Life in Oklahoma paints a stark picture of homelessness intertwined with urban violence, where vulnerable populations face daily dangers on the streets. Recent attacks indicate how the unhoused become targets, and their struggles amplified by a cycle of poverty and neglect. As tensions rise between displaced communities and public safety concerns, deeper questions emerge about the government's solutions. Can Oklahoma solve the problems occurring in its state relating to the homeless and create real change for them? Let's find out in today's video. But before that, smash that like button, share the good vibes, and subscribe so you never miss a beat. Oklahoma City is facing a severe homelessness crisis, with alarming numbers highlighting the growing problem. The 2024 homeless count revealed 1,838 people without homes, a 28% increase from the previous year. Behind these numbers are real struggles. 24% of these individuals sleep outside in all weather conditions. 62% stay in overcrowded shelters, and 9% are young adults under 24 with no stable place to live. This situation has escalated beyond a simple issue. It's now a full-blown emergency requiring immediate action. Rising inflation has made life even harder for Oklahoma City residents, pushing many toward homelessness. Soaring rents and food prices force families to choose between paying for housing or groceries, while seniors on fixed incomes struggle as costs outpace their savings. For those already homeless, inflation has been the final straw. Job losses, evictions, and unaffordable living expenses have left them with nowhere to go. Programs like Key to Home have helped reduce chronic homelessness by 33%. But the growing number of people losing housing due to economic pressures is overwhelming these efforts. With rents averaging over $1,200 and basic necessities becoming more expensive, shelters themselves are struggling with higher operating costs, without real solutions such as rent control, fair wages, and expanded affordable housing. More residents will continue slipping through the cracks.
We've had a really remarkably steep rise in the cost of rent in Oklahoma City, so the availability of affordable housing is what really drives homeless numbers in Oklahoma City.
That's true, especially when Oklahoma City's housing crisis is spiraling out of control, with wages unchanged in time while rents skyrocket. The state's 7.25 minimum wage, unchanged since 2008, is painfully out of touch with reality, especially when a living wage now requires 15.86 hours an hour just to get by. With average rents hitting $1,036 with 2 bedrooms at $1,180, minimum wage workers would need to work 88 hours a week just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. At fair housing standards, at 30% of income, rent should cost no more than $377, less than half of the reality. This isn't an affordability gap. It's an extreme burden on working Oklahomans as a whole. It's clearly seen that Oklahoma City's housing market is rigged against its poorest residents. While landlords raise rents, wages stay pitifully low, forcing families to choose between rent, food, and health care. The city's fair market rent is a bitter irony. There's nothing fair about a system where full-time work can't cover a basic housing rent. Without drastic policy changes in a living wage, rent control, or massive affordable housing investments, Oklahoma City will keep pushing its most vulnerable residents into homelessness, with each unpayable bill at a time. What Oklahoma City did next to address homelessness was so brutal. The Oklahoma City government has stepped up efforts to address homeless encampments, including placing large boulders beneath bridges where many seek shelter. In 2025, when officials cleared 35 individuals from beneath one such bridge, only 27 were provided with housing, while the remaining 8 disappeared back onto the streets. The city calls this progress, but these cruel tactics just hide human suffering instead of solving it. While the Key to Home program helps some forced displacements, Prove Oklahoma would rather make homelessness invisible than actually fix it, until leaders address the real causes. skyrocketing rents, poverty wages, and lack of services. This crisis will keep destroying lives while officials look away. Moreover, Oklahoma's homeless population faces a devastating healthcare crisis, with basic medical access blocked by impossible barriers, no transportation, missing IDs, and the daily struggle to survive. Chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and HIV go untreated, while emergency rooms serve as the only lifeline, only to discharge over 70% of homeless patients back to the streets without follow-up care, as happened to over 300 Oklahomans in 2022. The tragic case of Howard Holton, forced to sleep in an ER after hip surgery because no recovery facilities exist, exposes a system that abandons the most vulnerable, leaving them trapped in a cycle of deteriorating health and preventable suffering. Extreme weather and mental health gaps amplify the suffering. Oklahoma's scorching summers and freezing winters send countless homeless residents to hospitals, with 100 heat-related emergency calls in Oklahoma City just in 2024. Mental health services already stretched thin, face funding cuts that could shutter critical resources like Transition House, leaving vulnerable individuals without addiction or psychiatric care. Post-treatment recovery is nearly impossible when facilities refuse those needing rehabilitation. This neglect creates a costly cycle for everyone. Each homeless individual costs Oklahoma roughly $1,000 annually in emergency medical, policing, and social services expenses that could be slashed through preventive care and housing investments. As hospitals overflow, the human and financial toll proves one thing: ignoring this crisis isn't just heartless, it's economically reckless. Oklahoma must choose between funding real solutions or paying forever for the consequences of neglect. On the other hand, don't you know that over 2,000 students in Oklahoma City public schools lack stable housing each year, sleeping in cars, tents, or crashing on friends' couches? This hidden humanitarian crisis disrupts classrooms across the state, with countless more uncounted due to unstable living situations. At Positive Tomorrows, which is Oklahoma City's only school for homeless youth, 83% of students live in shelters or temporary housing, while 1 in 5 are couch homeless, one eviction away from sleeping on the streets. The impact is severe. Homeless students face triple the dropout rate of their peers, battling health crises and trauma while trying to learn. Without consistent addresses, many lose access to school meals, counseling, and basic supplies. Despite schools like Positive Tomorrows providing lifelines, the system is overwhelmed. Oklahoma's social services currently reach less than 40% of homeless youth. These students don't just risk falling behind academically. They're fighting for survival in a state where child homelessness has surged 28% since 2020. Every unattended backpack represents a future in jeopardy. Unsurprisingly, Oklahoma's aggravated assault crisis hits vulnerable populations hardest, with homeless individuals bearing the brunt of the violence. In 2022, the state recorded 3,134 aggravated assaults, a startling 17% increase over the past decade that far outpaces national averages. These numbers take on a more disturbing dimension when examining homelessness. Unsheltered individuals in Oklahoma City face exponentially higher risks, with studies showing their exposure to violence is compounded by extreme stress, health crises, and the constant insecurity of life on the streets. A horrific attack on a homeless man in Oklahoma City has exposed both the brutality faced by vulnerable populations and the disturbing role of social media in glorifying violence. On May 26, Tillman Shannon, a homeless man, was ambushed by a group of 9 teens who beat him mercilessly, even tearing out his colostomy bag, while 19-year-old Veronica Benavente live-streamed the assault on Instagram, shouting racist slurs. Surveillance footage shows Shannon attempting to flee before being knocked down near a dumpster, where the attack continued. Police have arrested Benavente and 18-year-old Eric Villagomez, along with 3 minors, but 4 suspects remain at large. The teens face charges including aggravated assault and conspiracy, with bonds set as high as $15,000. Yet the sheer cruelty of the attack and its public broadcast have shaken the community. Oklahoma City Police Secretary Dillian Quirk told K4TV he had some pretty severe injuries and pretty significant trauma. A self-reinforcing cycle of violence and homelessness leaves Oklahoma City's most vulnerable citizens trapped in danger. Without stable housing, individuals become easy targets for perpetrators, while the trauma of assault often deepens the cycles of addiction and mental health crises that keep people trapped in homelessness. Oklahoma City's streets have become a battleground where the unhoused are simultaneously over-policed as potential offenders and underprotected as victims. The teenage attackers in the June incident faced minimal consequences, reflecting a broader pattern where violence against homeless individuals is frequently dismissed as less serious, a perception that emboldens further attacks. Solutions require moving beyond temporary shelters to address systemic failures. While Oklahoma's rising assault rates demand urgent attention, traditional law enforcement approaches alone will fail without parallel investments in mental health services, trauma-informed housing programs, and community education. The teenagers who assaulted the homeless man didn't emerge in a vacuum. They grew up in a culture that often dehumanizes the unhoused. Breaking this cycle means treating safe housing as a crime prevention strategy, creating specialized victim services for homeless assault survivors, and holding perpetrators accountable regardless of the victim's housing status. Until then, Oklahoma's most marginalized residents will continue paying the price for these systemic gaps with their safety and sometimes their lives. Oklahoma's homelessness crisis has become a dangerous catalyst for the state's worsening drug crisis. With over 1,800 people living on Oklahoma City's streets, many suffering from untreated mental illness and chronic pain, desperate individuals increasingly turn to drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamine as self-medication or escape. The lack of shelter and healthcare creates a perfect storm. Homeless Oklahomans are 10 times more likely to die from overdoses than the general population, with fentanyl deaths surging 21% in 2023 alone. The data paints a grim cycle of addiction and homelessness. Methamphetamine, now implicated in 60% of Oklahoma's overdose deaths, has become the drug of choice for many homeless residents, offering temporary energy to endure life on the streets, while accelerating physical and mental decline. Emergency rooms see the brutal consequences. Homeless patients discharged after overdoses often return within weeks or sometimes days. The state's over 5,000 naloxone distributions have prevented countless deaths. But without housing and treatment, these interventions merely pause an inevitable relapse. Oklahoma's approach remains dangerous. While overdose deaths showed a 28% decline in 2024, this progress masks the root cause. Thousands remain trapped in a homelessness to addiction environment. Shelters report that 73% of their clients struggle with substance use, yet fewer than 20% can access long-term treatment. Until Oklahoma addresses the housing crisis as the public health emergency, it is the drug epidemic will continue claiming lives. The solution isn't just more naloxone, it's roofs over heads, healthcare within reach, and pathways out of desperation that make drugs less appealing than recovery. Oklahoma's homelessness crisis is fueling a dangerous rise in survival sex work across the state. As encampments grow and shelters overflow, desperate individuals, particularly women and LGBTQ+ youth, are increasingly forced into prostitution just to meet basic needs, like food and shelter. Recent prostitution stings tell only half the story. Many of those arrested are victims of circumstance trading, sex for a place to sleep, or protection from street violence. The February 2024 South Robinson Avenue operation that netted 62 arrests revealed a grim situation. Over 40% of those detained were recently homeless, with some carrying eviction notices in their pockets at the time of arrest. The state's punitive approach misses the root causes linking homelessness to exploitation. While House Bill 2054's felony charges for buyers represent progress, the law does nothing to address why people enter the trade.
We're going to see extreme legislation regularly. Unfortunately, that's been the case for, we've been experiencing extreme legislation every year, things that distract us from really doing the work of the people and that are not real solutions. So what we hear in that Standridge bill is not a solution. When you talk about public safety and you talk about well-being, if we do not help get people on their feet and get people housed, we will see public safety crisis.
Shelters report that 1 in 3 homeless women in Oklahoma City have engaged in survival sex, often to avoid sleeping outdoors where assault rates exceed 70%. Tragically, the very operations meant to clean up streets often re-traumatize victims, like a 19-year-old arrested in the April 2025 sweep who'd been trading sex for motel vouchers after aging out of foster care. Without housing solutions, these cycles will continue. However, Oklahoma's prostitution crackdowns create a vicious cycle for the unhoused. Each arrest leaves homeless individuals with criminal records that further block access to housing and jobs, pushing them deeper into exploitation. While businesses celebrate cleaner streets, the underlying crisis worsens. The South Robinson Avenue corridor saw a 28% increase in homeless sex workers in 2024, despite the stings. Real solutions require housing-first policies and specialized shelters, not just handcuffs. Until Oklahoma addresses the homelessness to prostitution pipeline, enforcement will remain a revolving door of despair.
It's been a continued problem area for prostitution. We're doing everything we can to try to find these victims of human trafficking and try to get them out of this line of work and into something that can really help them.
Besides prostitution, Oklahoma's homeless population faces a heightened and often invisible epidemic of sexual violence, with systemic barriers silencing survivors. Research reveals that homeless individuals, particularly unsheltered adults and youth, experience sexual assault at alarming rates. Yet fewer than 30% of cases are reported due to distrust of law enforcement, fear of retaliation, and lack of access to support systems. In Oklahoma City, studies show that homelessness exacerbates vulnerabilities like extreme stress and health crises, creating conditions where predators exploit desperation. Even when assaults occur, survivors rarely seek medical or legal help, with post-assault examinations going unused. Not because the need isn't there, but because shelters and streets offer no safe pathways to justice or healing. The state's failure to address this crisis perpetuates cycles of trauma and homelessness. Without trusted reporting mechanisms or trauma-informed care tailored to homeless populations, survivors remain trapped in silence. Their assaults untreated and unprosecuted. Oklahoma's existing infrastructure, overwhelmed shelters, underfunded social services, and a legal system that often criminalizes homelessness, actively discourage disclosure. Until the state invests in mobile crisis teams, survivor-centered housing programs, and outreach workers trained specifically in sexual violence response, this hidden crisis will continue unchecked, leaving countless victims without recourse or protection. In fact, Oklahoma recorded 93756 property crimes and 16871 violent crimes in 2022. But portraying homelessness as a primary factor in these statistics oversimplifies reality. Research shows that homeless individuals are far more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators, a pattern reflected in Oklahoma City studies, where unhoused people reported frequent thefts and assaults that often went unreported due to distrust of authorities. Nationally, homeless individuals are 10 times more likely to experience violent victimization than the general population, highlighting their vulnerability rather than criminality. When theft does occur, survival, not malice, is typically the motive. Oklahoma data suggests that about 20% of unsheltered individuals have committed minor thefts, with hunger and lack of shelter being key factors. Shoplifting food or blankets starkly differs from predatory crime. While these acts remain illegal, they expose systemic failures of the Oklahoma Authority in meeting basic needs. Remember, addressing root causes. Food insecurity, housing shortages, and mental health gaps would reduce such crimes more effectively than punitive measures alone. The devastating link between homelessness and domestic violence in Oklahoma creates a dangerous cycle that traps survivors. While homelessness doesn't cause abuse, the instability of life without housing dramatically increases risks. Over 50% of Tulsa's homeless population in 2023 reported experiencing domestic violence. Survivors face impossible choices: stay with an abuser or brave the streets where overcrowded shelters and financial barriers leave few safe options. This cruel dilemma forces many back into abusive situations, with nearly 40% of domestic violence survivors in Oklahoma City shelters reporting they previously returned to their abuser because they had nowhere else to go. While legal protections exist, systemic gaps leave many survivors unprotected. Oklahoma law allows domestic violence victims to break leases without penalty and waives utility deposits. But these measures mean little when affordable housing wait lists stretch for years. Organizations like Young Women's Christian Association of Oklahoma City provide critical emergency shelter and counseling. But with only 12 domestic violence shelter beds per 100,000 residents, far below the national average, many survivors still fall through the cracks. Until Oklahoma invests in more transitional housing and economic support for survivors, the dangerous link between domestic violence and homelessness will persist, trapping vulnerable individuals in cycles of abuse and instability.
We're able to connect them to resources and to keep them safe,
which would protect a woman or a man inside their home, defending themselves in their home against a domestic partner.
Oklahoma's domestic violence crisis demands urgent action to prevent further harm to families and strain on social services and law enforcement. Without legislative reforms and funding, the risk of fatalities will rise, especially for vulnerable women and children. Immediate intervention is crucial to break the cycle of trauma and protect lives. Public opinion in Oklahoma City regarding homelessness is multifaceted, reflecting both concern and a desire for effective solutions. A recent city survey revealed that a significant portion of residents are dissatisfied with the current state of homelessness, with 32% expressing dissatisfaction and an additional 51% being very dissatisfied. Many residents perceive homelessness as a pressing issue, often citing its visibility and impact on community aesthetics and safety. The others, on the other hand, sympathize with the homeless. Homelessness does not discriminate against anyone, right? It could be me tomorrow. It could be someone else the next day. And so I think it's kind of giving that viewpoint and understanding that this can happen to anybody. Oklahoma's approach to homelessness remains contradictory, with punitive measures undermining its progressive initiatives. While the Oklahoma City Police Department's Homeless Outreach Team, CHOT, and Crisis Intervention Training (CIT) demonstrate commendable efforts to connect vulnerable individuals with services, these programs are overshadowed by aggressive enforcement. Controversial incidents like encampment sweeps, displacing dozens without housing alternatives, reveal a systemic preference for criminalization over compassion. Proposed bills like Oklahoma's Senate Bill 1854, SB 1854, and House Bill 3686, HB 3686, which sought to jail people for sleeping outdoors, exemplify policies that worsen homelessness rather than solve it. The city will come out and clean it up, and then in 2 or 3 days it should be back in the same condition as before. And it will stay that way for 3 weeks, until the city comes out again. Yet promising models offer a path forward if expanded. The 988 Lifeline's 57% reduction in police mental health calls proves diversion works, while the Homeless Outreach Team's collaboration with social workers shows incarceration rates drop when treatment replaces arrests. These successes highlight an achievable blueprint, scaling outreach programs while abandoning counterproductive sweeps and criminalization. Oklahoma's next step is clear: divert funding from enforcement to housing-first solutions, ensuring supportive initiatives aren't negated by regressive policies. The solutions exist. The state must now use them consistently. In a nutshell, as Oklahoma faces this growing crisis, real change will take more than quick fixes or displacements. Lasting solutions must tackle the root causes, like the lack of affordable housing, mental health care, and fair wages, while treating those affected with dignity. The suffering on our streets demands action. Now, whether through better shelters, job programs, or stronger community support, whether leaders and citizens can come together to fix a system that's failing so many. What do you think? Can Oklahoma turn this around? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates. See you next time.